Okay, hello everyone. We'll get started now with the second session of the morning. This session is Cyber Risks and Impacts, Lessons Learned from Recent Attacks, and it's going to be presented by Anne Wyganowski. Anne is a business continuity planning instructor here at DRI Canada, a certified business continuity professional with more than 30 years of program and project management experience. Anne has successfully implemented large-scale business continuity programs and managed programs during major operational disruptions, including the recent COVID-19 pandemic. Anne was also a member of DRI Canada's Board of Directors for 6 years, was president of the Toronto Disaster Recovery Information Exchange for many years, and has been a member of the advisory board to the World Conference on Disaster Management. The DRI Canada Builder Award was presented to Anne for her significant contributions to the development and growth of our organization. Please join me in welcoming Anne Wyganowski.
Okay, can everybody hear me at the back okay? I'm not a really loud person. Okay, so if you can't, wave your hands around and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of dark stuff in some of the things that I'm going to touch on this morning, but let's look at the way forward and where we can go from here. And let's see, this is okay. So what we'll talk about what is cybersecurity versus cyber resilience, right? We've heard that resilience word a lot, and we got another new definition at the keynote this morning of resilience as well, so it gets more and more interesting. But cyber resilience is something with a little bit of a different view, so we'll talk about the differences there. We'll talk about the Canadian landscape with cyber, and the case studies that I've chosen today are Canadian. So it's hotter than climate change. Yes, the north is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet, but so is our cyber environment. And we'll talk about, the risk assessment picture. There's a lot going on in the insurance industry lately where they seem to be offering all sorts of services which they're not necessarily credentialed in cyber resilience perhaps, but everyone seems to be jumping on the bandwagon, so maybe that's a form of adaptation to a new risk. And maybe it's a cheap date, maybe it's a money grab to sell more money or sell more insurance, or to scare clients into buying more cyber insurance if you can get it. And just remember that security preparation is not resilience. It's getting ready for the event. And, as professionals in the continuity industry, we don't really intrude on other, industry disciplines or tell them what to do, but there's more and more integration happening, and I guess, Nancy, you'll be talking about some of the integration later this afternoon, too, in your talk. So, we'll be getting there. So what's going on in Canada? Hey, lots of things, okay? So there's no shortage of it. I think I had a little picture of the Huntsville Town Hall on this slide, but I took it off because even though I prepared the slides 2 or 3 weeks ago, it kept getting more and more crowded on this slide as there were more and more things happening. And, so some of this, it's right in my backyard, the town of Huntsville. Usually I park in front of City Hall when I go to get my hair cut. I drive up from Port Carling because I like the hairdresser. She used to be in Port Carling, but she moved back to Huntsville. And you always dress for that occasion because, you leave the occasion covered with all these little bits of hair all over you, but she gives a great haircut. So I go there. And, we're seeing what's happening too with laws and regulations and government attempts to doing some of these things about it. And like in the US, it's illegal to pay ransomware, but only in some states. And that was following the major Colonial Pipelines disaster. So we're seeing what the sort of outcome of that is, and if people are really paying attention to that, or if they're still paying the ransom. So let's talk about Huntsville quickly, because that's kind of a funny one. It's in the district of Muskoka. There's Huntsville, the township of Muskoka Lakes, Bracebridge, Gravenhurst, and township of Georgian Bay. Big geographical area. So we don't really know what the depth of the breach was, but it was certainly like on CP24 in Toronto. So it made the major headlines when it did occur. Some of the small things were immediately canceled, like, concerts, town services, but we don't really know very much about it yet, and we still don't, and this is a month later. So, how far did it go, and did the district of Muskoka get infiltrated, right? So when you think about, still as of April 5th, most municipal services were not available. And a lot of small towns and municipalities, I've noticed, seem to be getting targeted because they outsource a lot of their IT to smaller IT firms. And they've got older equipment, perhaps. They're less security aware. There's less patch management. I'm more worried that they've gotten into the actual district itself, because the district, rather than the town, manages things like, the waste, the hospitals, the long-term care homes, health in the district, just to name a few things, right? So if garbage pickup gets kind of screwed up in the summer, then that means we got a big problem with bears in Muskoka, which is not a lot of fun, and the wildlife can get pretty ugly there. And they are waking up early, and we've seen evidence of that. So not only did the ice melt early because we're heating up so quickly, but the bears are waking up. And, even things that we see that are district services, like we can see where the snowplows are during severe winter storms on the, website and stuff like that. And, you think about it, City of Huntsville is being remarkably secretive. They immediately brought in their cyber experts, and we'll talk about those cyber experts and the cyber insurance in a few minutes. But, this is something that's out of their control. So even things that are within their control, that where they decided to rewrite geopolitical history, where Huntsville Town Council voted to take down the Russian flag following the Ukrainian invasion at the G8 pavilion that they built for the G8 summit, which is Huntsville reduced to the G7, apparently. I don't know if they've let anyone else know about that, but they did take down the flag, and that was big news in Muskoka, right? The town council had voted to take it down. And, but, like, things like the healthcare systems, those all link into our provincial systems and perhaps federal systems further from there. And, do these black hats that break in, do they know how many COVID boosters I've had? Probably not, but it is a way in to other systems, right? All of these systems and endpoints that we have recording things related to our health. And what I notice is companies and government are not really revealing the cause. They're cagey about what they're telling the public. And can government really keep up with it? Like, look at the various things here, like even FinTrack, which is our financial intelligence unit that looks at money laundering. So the black hats are really trying to look at things where we catch them as well, right? So they're going after what gets them caught. And we have had, some recent big things lately where they have caught, some of these big gangs and dismantled them. But, the RCMP website got hit. It's hosted by Shared Services of Canada. We're still not sure what kind of attack it was. Maybe it was a denial of service. They didn't really say. They've been, very close-lipped about it as well, as many organizations. There was a big attack on really Southwest Ontario healthcare systems, which involved several different hospitals. And that was a ransomware attack Toronto Public Library, we're going to get to that in detail because there was a lot of information about that because it was such a very public ransomware attack. We'll go through exactly what happened to them. Suncor, so it's not, there's critical infrastructure, the yellow pages. Indigo Chapters was also an interesting big one. It was back in the beginning of 2023, but it was interesting to watch because that was also quite public, but they blatantly refused to pay the ransom right up front. And I watched that with interest because I used to work out at the YMCA years ago in Toronto with one of the members of the chapters, Indigo Coles family bookstores. So it was interesting to see the kind of stance that they immediately took and said, no, we're not paying. And the one that was on there also, I think, City of Hamilton. Hamilton actually recovered quite quickly from this, and that's because they had a lot of network segmentation. They had good incident management practices, and so their speed of incident management was good. Their ability to contain the event from an IT perspective and to revert to manual processes also existed. And that's because they have good business continuity plans, and I know that because I worked on some of them, and good IT DR plans. So they had business resilience, and they were ready for it, not only technically, but capably. So there's another example, of course, it's not on here, from RSA Insurance. They had a big attack that they took months to let anybody know about. I did write an article about it, and that's in the True North spring issue that there's many copies available at the check-in desk if you want to read in depth what I thought about how they handled it and what they did incorrectly. And that's an insurance company, by the way, so that's in the financial sector. So that's a little bit of a concern when they don't tell you that people have stolen things like images of your driver's license for several months, until several months after the fact. That's an extreme attack. So what are we doing wrong? We're burying it, And there's so many breaches, and it's like, you see it on the news ticker on CP24. Oh, look, there's another one. That's when I stopped updating this slide. It got to be too much. We start to get complacent. It's sort of like, oh, so it's all just happening, right? And there's nothing much that we can do about it. But don't forget, a lot of this stuff is state-sponsored. Ransomware is lucrative. And so, how else is Kim Jong-un going to get money for his nuclear program and some of these other states when they're all under various global sanctions, right? So cyber, crime is state-sponsored in many cases, and that's not our culture in North America, but it is in other parts of the world. So don't forget, we're not just here in a bubble. It's a global problem. So a lot of groups are moving things to the cloud too, right? And the cloud is a pretty cloudy place. And, once it gets, your stuff's there, it's like, oh, good, it's not my responsibility anymore. It's in the cloud. That's good. I feel so relieved. They're going to look after it. They've got, all this infrastructure. They're doing all these things. They've shown me their incident response plan. But when you go and ask, it's just like co-location providers. When you ask those cloud providers, so when something big happens, where am I on your pecking order for recovery? They can't really answer that question. That's like a real trick question to them because most of them haven't really thought that far. They've done the technical plans, but they haven't necessarily thought out the relative priority of their customers. So whether, like the telcos and the critical infrastructure all have that, as you've seen during the power outage, we look after life safety and government and get power and, services back to, those critical groups. And then we move on to the general public. And from there, then we move to business, right? So business is third. So they haven't done that kind of prioritization process yet. So the important things to remember here is cybersecurity is something that you do in advance. So it's all the good stuff that all the techie people do, all the firewalls and all the phishing emails that they send you, and all the detection stuff and things that they say that they've got in place. And yeah, there's no way that, these guys will get in. We've got it all covered. And cyber resilience is what you do once you've discovered the breach. And so that's where your business continuity plans have to become a lot more robust. And we need to take another look at them. And that's where we're moving to that resilience concept. And, these discussions, of course, or definitions are from the International Glossary for Resilience. So anybody that's certified understands that, then that's our go-to glossary, because there are so many different definitions floating around out there. And, the big difference is you can prepare as much as you want, but what do you do once you discover the black hats are in? In advance, of course, we should be doing risk assessment. And there's another funny article about risk assessments, although they're not cyber risk assessments, in the True North magazine that my business associate Fred and I wrote together and had a lot of fun doing. So it's a bit of a humorous take on it. But, there's a lot of look at big data. We saw a trend towards that, I would say, starting in the early 90s. And we've continued on that path where storage has gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and data, big data, has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Certainly, like in the health sector, you've got, they've always had like big data because they've got all this diagnostic imaging and all kinds of stuff like that. In the engineering world, they've got all sorts of diagrams and that kind of thing. So big data means different things in different industry sectors. But what kind of data do we have? And that's not just, the stuff that we keep for our organization's business purposes, but it's also employee data, customer data, supplier data. There's lots of different kinds of data that we've got in there. And what are all the different endpoints that we have, right? The more things that we put in the cloud, the more terminals, the more things that we have that people use to access our network and get in. There's more and more endpoints, more ways in for the black hats. And, there's IT tends to focus often on implementing the technology of the day, or soup du jour. They want to put in the sexy new technology, and they tend to let things slide, like the patch management, managing the old hardware, retiring things. Those are the less sexy kind of things to do in IT. You want to do things to impress the rest of the business because they're your customers, right? And so you want them to see value coming from IT, which isn't usually, obvious when you're retiring old software and that kind of thing, right? So there's a lot of old stuff around. And then there's the whole question about where you keep your encryption keys, right? So we encrypt things, but often we have the encryption keys accessible somewhere on our network. So once those black hats get in there and they have a good time exploring your network, and we'll look at some of the timelines about how long they spanned crawling around your space. When they find your encryption keys, what do you think they're going to do with them? They're going to encrypt them, because when they do the ransomware, they don't want you to be able to decrypt all your stuff and restore it. So again, there's the documented ITDR plan. Now that changes a lot in a cyber attack, right? Because, and we'll talk about that some more too, right? Where it becomes a crime scene and you can't go to your normal recovery environment and enact recovery. So your ITDR plan not only should be documented, which in a lot of cases it isn't, but, you know, it's something that you really need to think about the flexibility of and what your alternatives are, right? So we've usually said, okay, well, we're going to go and we're going to restore in this environment right here, and we don't think about the alternatives, and we're going to restore the data here, and this is where we're getting the backups. Like, where are we putting the backups, right? There's industry terminologies called air gapping, right? Where this is your network and your backup's over here, so that when the black hats get in here, they don't get into your backups. And you do have to be careful about what you're backing up, right? So what are you backing up, right? Is it the whole server? Could you be backing up part of the infection? And, you know, what can the ransomware guys and the black hats still grab when they, you know, get passed around? The federal governments are usually really good about doing different levels of protection and classifying data. That's one thing that governments do, at least federal governments do really well, is setting the appropriate levels of protection around data. And, you know, Mr. Trump's bathroom storage facility will leave alone. It's not a sensitive compartmented information facility, a SCIF, which is where these things are supposed to be kept. I think back in the early 90s, I did do a business continuity plan for a SCIF, so I'm very familiar with them. And, you know, we've got to think the same with electronic data, just like that physical SCIF that we have for the real papers and the real legal documents, because there is still paper, as green as we want to be. There's still lots of paper out there. So how many of you have documented ITDR plans? Okay, so a few. How many have business continuity or business resilience plans? Lots more. And how many have cybersecurity plans? A few. What about cyber resilience plans? No. Okay, one person. How old is it? Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, we're looking at that right now when we're putting together an exercise for one of our clients, and some of their plans, like even their ransomware plan, hasn't been updated for 3 years, but ransomware has changed a lot. So let's talk about TPL. This was a very visible failure. It's a huge library system when you think about it. Most people don't realize how big the Toronto Public Library really is. You know, besides the little branch that I used to take my kids to, you know, when they were small in the local shopping center. There's like 12 million books through 100 branches, 1,200,000 registered members. They've got an annual budget of $200 million. And, you know, October 27th, all of a sudden, whoa, we've had an attack. And October 28th, abruptly, the entire network shuts down and the environment shuts down, all the internal and external networks. They did have the foresight to have a shadow website. I've got one of those too in case my real website goes down. A lot of people don't think about that, but you should have a shadow website that you move to. They brought in the third-party cybersecurity technical experts and third-party legal counsel. That's probably all stipulated in your cyber insurance. The police were engaged, IMS, their incident management system. The BCPs were activated. They talked to the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. So they knew that they should do a few of the right things. It took 2 days for full isolation and containment. So think about that, 2 days, right? So what else could the black hats have done? So don't forget, right, even though you've got that insurance, October 28th, okay, let's, get our insurance people. What they're going to do is say, okay, well, this whole thing's a crime scene. We're locking the whole thing down. And that's all your all of your endpoints. Like, and all these people that are impacted, right? All their members, their researchers, there's research projects and funding that's being disrupted over several months. I know that they had good advice because I know other consultants that I'm familiar with that have been in to talk to TPL, but they failed to do anything that was recommended, actually, which was kind of an interesting insider piece of information. And so there was no way forward except to do that complete shutdown. So there's lots of these third-party cybersecurity experts around North America. And don't forget that they're cybersecurity experts. They're not cyber resilience experts. Cybersecurity is what you do in advance. So once this whole crime scene has happened and they've done this whole shutdown, they're looking for how the black hats got in, where they went, what your vulnerabilities were, what you have to correct, what they did inside your system. They're not telling you how to get back up and running. They're in there to do the insurance part of it, which is to contain it. And so they know how to trace it, and they're techie, but they're not helping business and your IT DR team do what they have to do, are they? They're just saying, oh, sorry, it's all shut down now. We're in control. We're the cybersecurity experts. So this was a group called Black Basta. And so this ransomware note came up on one of the workstations where librarians or employees were actually logged in. And anybody else who wasn't logged in at the time couldn't get back in to get email or any services. And you can't see it very well on here, but up in the top there, it does say that the contact point is Basta. We'll get to them next. And, so this is what they do, right? The ransomware note comes up and you go, oh, we've been breached. So the insurance company and the external experts, like, think about it. Have you actually tested anything with your insurer other than notification? And do you know what your insurer is going to demand that you do once you've been infected? And, that's an important integration test, right? Because they're going to really be telling you what you can do with your environment or your insurance money's no good. And, the consultants, the security experts, they're educated in security architecture, security training, looking at the endpoints, the pre-identified points of entry. They don't necessarily know any new zero-day or any new vulnerability points. And Black Basta is just one of them, okay? Like, you can scare the heck out of yourself and not sleep at night. And sometimes these groups, this group in particular, the experts think that they might be a spin-off from another group that existed, and they're rebranding themselves. And so some of these cyber criminals are actually, they're into rebranding. It's just like, our politicians perhaps. And, there's one that I look at, it's called Dark Reading Weekly, and then there's another website that I go to that's called bleepingcomputer.com. And you'll see a large variety of these different types of cyber crooks. And, their file encryptor needs some kind of an administrative privilege to run. And what they do is they hijack existing Windows services. So they're going through a lot of very common tools and things that we employ in our IT environment, which To the end users, it doesn't look like much, but there's so much complexity there. It's like Humpty Dumpty, right? There's so many different pieces that IT has in there that puts together that whole IT environment. You just expect it to be there when you go to work and turn on your computer. It's a lot more complicated. So, you know, consider also smishing. One of our clients had a smishing attack recently, and that's where the link comes through text instead of email. And the text was telling managers to go to a certain place and subscribe their employees to something in support of something that the VP was telling them to do. So in this case, they were going after some fairly senior level credentials, trying to get in with senior level credentials rather than low level to start and work their way through the system. So the story continues with Toronto Public Library. And you know, November 15th, this is 2 weeks, over 2 weeks a bit after the attack, right? So they announce a privacy breach, which is better than RSA insurance, telling me 6 months later that somebody's got my data. So there's, you know, all sorts of stuff going back to 1998, so they knew that much. They knew some of the things about government-issued ID, right? Because, of course, you think nothing of, like, you know, going to the library and showing your government-issued ID with your address so that you can get a library card and all the things that we keep there. So, you know, they decided to do 2 years of credit monitoring. They didn't pay ransom, but they told people that some of your data might be on the dark web. So great. And then you've got the mayor involved, right? This is a big politician. This is the mayor of Canada's biggest city and one of the biggest cities in North America, for that matter. So Mayor Chow says there's still no timeline for restoration, and we got to think about, you know, what's the mayor asking them? They were having numerous meetings behind the scenes with various committees, with all sorts of other groups at City Hall, and so on and so forth. But what's in the back of the, you know, when you think about the politician, what's always in the back of their mind is, will I be reelected? And so what message do they want to be giving out? And the crisis management and the incident escalation are absolutely critical. You know, those are part of our professional practices. And what I noticed here is that the chief librarian became a media spokesperson, which was kind of an interesting phenomenon. You don't expect the chief librarian to be a media spokesperson in a disaster. And, you know, they were giving out, they had to report on it in their year-end report, but that wasn't till December. And they also had to, like, you know, make it plain that these interruptions are going to continue into next year. So this started October 27th, and it's going to keep going. And the library is still a crime scene, by the way. That was in the report. So January 11th, they started to enact some manual workarounds. So I don't know if they really didn't have any in their business continuity plans, and they just finally figured them out, and it took them that long, or if they just didn't do it because they didn't know what to do, or some of their manual workarounds hadn't really been tested, and they didn't know if they would really work with this. And of course, there was the picture of all these trucks for the off-site trailers. Those are all returned books that were being stored in off-site trailers. I was wondering what, the news media discovered this, of course, and put it on. Nobody told them where it was, but they found it. But what I was wondering was where all the returned e-books went, right? There's lots of e-books and electronic stuff, especially for all those researchers. And slowly but surely, the end of February, this is a long time now, isn't it? They're restoring the catalog, the search features, and customer accounts. You can now get your account. You can place and manage holds, renew items, and search the catalog. And, but some things are still not available. And the full extent of the breach is still being investigated, right? So those cybersecurity experts are still trying to figure out what the black hats did in there. That's what that tells you. So at least they were constantly reporting to the public. After all, you know, these are taxpayers' dollars, right? And people outside of the city of Toronto, and there are lots of them, pay handsomely for their memberships with the library because it's such a big library and access to all that reading. So think about in your continuity plans and, you know, your incident management plans, how do you track the costs and the impacts? Think about this starting in October and going for months. What are all the different costs associated with this? There's not only lost productivity from all these people that couldn't figure out what their manual workarounds were till January, but there's all the stuff that they were doing. And why did it take so long? Well, this is why it took so long. We all heard the expression in the election, "Build Back Better," from Mr. Biden, and I think Mr. Trudeau was using it too, perhaps. Anyways, it sounded pretty good, "Build Back Better." But, you know, even though they had some kind of a cyber resilience plan, they had business continuity plans, we think. They had an IMS system or an incident management system, you know, and an EOC in the city. They had third-party providers. So they came back and said that they've improved their NIST cybersecurity framework maturity level. So that's something big. They was at developing, which is very typical of public sector, that they're developing. They've upgraded software, servers, applications, right? They've improved patch management. They've done advanced threat monitoring and hunting, right? So they implemented what we call CM, which is the Security Information Event Management. And often you can have lots of those CMs all over the place, right? Not just one of them. So there's log management, there's aggregation. Some of these CM tools do some of that for you. I had a client in New Zealand tell me a week and a half ago or a week ago that we've got CrowdStrike. We don't need anything else. And CrowdStrike is a CM. It does not do everything that the SOAR does. And what the SOAR does is it takes all those little things. It's called Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. That's why we've got two little acronyms there, the CM and the SOAR. The SOAR takes all that stuff that all the CMs are spitting out, and there might be multiple ones of them, and it automates the incident management. So it aggregates all that security information and says, oh, wait, this is bad. Something is really going on here. And because don't forget, these black hats are moving all over the place once they've gotten in. And so it collates the multiple data sets and it escalates it, and it automates that escalation on a timely basis. So basically it pushes the big red button for you and tells you. So AI is new on the scene, and more on AI in a couple of minutes. I will mention that there is global teamwork. We're not alone. And there's the Five Eyes, right? There's Canada, the US, the UK, Europe, New Zealand, and Australia kind of thing. So they're called the Five Eyes, even though there's sort of 6 of them. I guess the UK kind of gets lumped in with Europe. And they do a lot of information sharing through these things called these Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, ISACs. And the ISACs are very important for every industry. There's big ones in the financial sector. In the US and Canada, we do a lot of of trading of information and sharing of information. Actually, there's a lot between the US and Canada. They help the federal governments look at critical infrastructure and protect critical infrastructure. And they have the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, publishes a great list of bad practices, and that's on the cisa.gov/bad.practices site. But you can just Google it and it'll come up. And they're collaborative approaches to identifying and gaining advanced knowledge on some of these threats by different sectors, particularly when we see activity happening in a particular sector that they're going after. So it could be the difference between business continuity or catastrophe, right? So I won't go through all the ISACs. There's lots of them. There's also the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which is the primary federal government point of contact on cybersecurity operational, including the incident response and the coordination. So they provide a lot of data about malicious activity and from cyber threat actors, including the foreign states, the hacktivists, the criminals, the terrorists. They link up with the ISACs. There's, when you think about it, we're also finger itchy in Canada. We have more computers per capita than any other country. We have 129 devices per 100 people. We love our technology because there's nothing to do when we get frozen in during the winter. We play with technology. We have a lot of fun with it. So we have lots and lots of computers. So it's like something new comes out. It's like, oh, we gotta have that. Gotta have the most recent thing. Let's go get that and see what it does. So we are computer addicted. Let's look at another case study quickly before we move to AI. So, and I'm getting near the end, so I've got to put a boot to the rear here. I've only got another 3 slides. So this one is poignant. A lot of things are coming out in relation to the cascading impacts that were associated with the pandemic. And, you know, we even had that discussion this morning with our keynote speaker, right, where he was talking about some of the cascading impacts that happened during the pandemic and how they turned into larger threats. So, you know, early in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, we're all glued to our TVs. We're all watching every day that map would come up, showing how many cases there were in the different provinces. And every day for a long time, the big joke in the family was that none of it had none of it, because they had a 0 on that map for a long time. Well, Newfoundland and Labrador did pretty good too. Actually, they were sending nurses to other provinces during the height of some of this. And you know, so that was kind of interesting, but they got hit too. So, you know, October 15th, the hackers get in. They used a VPN connection using a compromised, legitimate user account. And that's often, you know, so it's, and this one, it was 15 days before they found how long they'd been in there. The Toronto Public Library didn't really tell us how long they were in there. They could have been in there for, like, God knows, weeks or months. So exploring their whole system because it was such a big shutdown. So, you know, you think about those understaffed and underfunded emergency rooms and doctors and nurses and the surgical backlog that was there. And so what they did was they exfiltrated. There's another new word to write down. Exfiltrated means that they transferred your data or stole your data. Okay, they transferred it. And then they deployed the ransomware and they encrypted numerous systems. And now they found out about it, right? 15 days later, October 30th. So this was like a provincial level emergency operations center response. Nearly all medical procedures were canceled, And this is after they'd all been delayed for months too, right? So when you think about people with cancer and other life-threatening things that they needed surgeries and treatment for, this is really quite horrible. And maybe that's why the ransomware guys go after this stuff, right? Because there's an emotional attachment to these, because humans will want to save humans. And one of the things that's interesting is the healthcare sector is really good about reverting to paper-based workarounds and manual workarounds, despite their reliance on all the technology and the diagnostic imaging and everything. And I remember conducting a BIA with a major hospital in Toronto once, and we were talking about, strategies for those different critical business functions. Somebody went to the back of the room and they opened a closet and they pulled out this big red binder, and they said, everyone forgets that we've got this big red binder full of forms, but these are the manual workarounds. And so they have stuff like that. And, but like, do these groups really have business continuity plans, and how long can they sustain them? So they've got like emergency plans and stuff like that, but a lot of them don't have business continuity and business resilience plans. And what's even worse is they often don't have ITDR plans. I've seen hospitals and healthcare facilities stick their IT stuff in the most horrible places in facilities, and all, with all these medical buildings, they all have sinks and taps and everything everywhere, and like water goes down, right? But they think, okay, well, here's a spot in the basement. It's all nice and secure. It's got no windows. It's next to the elevators, and let's put it all here. And so, anyways, that's I digress. So, when you think about a really sustained IT outage and how dependent you are on those IT services, it doesn't have to be the healthcare sector. And one thing I have seen too that we're seeing outside of the healthcare sector is where there's critical equipment and the software and hardware is actually integrated together. So that's even harder to recover. It's a completely different kettle of fish. So, human health and safety, right? That's easy to ransom. It's just like kidnapping people. When you think about it, there's the privacy, but the human life is a game changer, and the health system and lower levels of government, like the town of Huntsville, are easy entry points for these groups to get in. That's why they're going after them. And, think about the disruption when somebody can't get to their scheduled healthcare treatment. My husband used to get a ride sometimes to his Alzheimer's program with the Red Cross van from Port Carling. And it was always a crapshoot, depending on whether somebody had to go to a hospital somewhere or something. But they seemed to be remarkably like they were doing manual processes, but they actually had some kind of IT system in the background that they entered everything into. It was weird, but I guess they could really continue without all that and do everything manually. But, privacy is a big legal issue. Laws and regulations are new. It's far-reaching. Some of the ways that we're managing privacy is still being thought out. But think about all the data and all the privacy data that we maintain. So it's perhaps one of the biggest emerging issues that could drive IT security. And AI is becoming increasingly used in health management in particular, because it's got so many benefits, right? It's so much better at reading cancer tests of various kinds and identifying the results than humans physically reviewing them. So think about, can it be weaponized? Like, can you turn it into a weapon, just like ransomware? And that's, the attack on human life. It's an interesting kind of a question where we go with AI and how we manage it. We're still recovering from COVID, and you know, the impacts to mental health. How many people still get their credit card statements in the mail? Well, a few people. I do, because I can pick out the things that shouldn't be on there, and I find them quite frequently, but if they're electronic, that's a lot harder to pick out. I know everybody wants to be green. Think about social behaviors have changed with work from home and hybrid, and it's not as easy to socialize with your coworkers, and the black hats are taking advantage of that isolation and the willingness of the people that are working at home with, you know, doing things and engaging with them. So one of the things that they need is big data. AI needs big data. And that's why you see these increasing attacks on Facebook and Meta and stuff like that. That's got tons and tons and tons of personal data, but it's also got a lot of data about how we behave, doesn't it? Like, I've got some friends and family that seem to live their lives on Facebook. I'm terrible at using apps. I think that's, you know, part of my age group, where I figure it out once and then I can't remember how I did it, you know, and it's like my son's fiance runs the bakery in Port Carling, and she seems to exist her whole bakery life on Instagram. And I go, oh, let me show you these custom cakes that Sue makes, and I can't for the life of me figure out how to get to the place where all the pictures are. So like but there's big data there about what we do and how we behave. And that's why the black hats are going after that big data. I mean, some of the good things, right? Like the SOAR gets better at identifying faster the attack indicators and threat detection, and, you know, there's stronger policies for access, and our threat intelligence improves in general. But don't forget that we're still humans, we're still involved in the incident management and the decision making. And, but we can move faster. And that's the big mistake with some of these cyber attacks. You know, there's data privacy concerns, there's cascading weak points within all of this. And the black hats are trying to exploit AI just as fast as we are. So they're looking at what we're doing with it, and they're trying to figure out how they can get around that so that they can still get in. So like, when does SOAR call 911, you know, and tell us to press the big red button and activate and respond? What if AI tells us not to? Like, what if if the black hats find a vulnerability that tells the SOAR, oh, hey, that's not really an issue, forget about it, right? So there is that capability with AI too. It's almost like some kind of weird war where they can poison our data. So rather waiting to build back better, maybe it's time that we build better now. And maybe that's where we're going with all this. So again, remember, cyber resilience is different than cyber security. Improve and monitor your policies and processes, face the reality. You need the new technologies to keep up the fight. And there is no endpoint, right? This will continue to evolve. It's not like it's done. A lot of people made that mistake in Y2K, you know, like where we did all the stuff. And it's like, hey, the project is done. Let's put the binders up on the shelf. And then we had 9/11, and everybody had to activate their plans. And it was like, oh, I guess we shouldn't have let those plans get out of date. So remember, it's a criminal activity. You need to report it, and it should be reported. Make sure you do a proper risk assessment. And IT likes to say it's all looked after. Don't worry, be happy. Leadership is liable for managing that risk. Remember, there's negligence where they knew about it and did nothing, and then there's duty of care, you know, to your customers, your organization, your employees, your suppliers, particularly with respect to managing the privacy and the data. And AI is new, and it's here to stay. And just remember, it's an evolving landscape. So you've got to keep your finger on the pulse. So I made it to 1 minute before 12. So depending on how hungry you are, questions. Okay. Hopefully that was fun for everybody and I haven't scared anybody too much. Thank you.
Token of appreciation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Lunch will now be served in the main room where the keynote address was this morning. Thank you.